Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of the show, bringing another really awesome guest for you today. We are headed back into the realm of fast-moving consumer goods, and we have the honor of being joined today by Auroni Majumdar, who is the Vice President R&D Global Innovation at CheilJedang, or also known as the CJ Group, major South Korean global food and biotech company, part of the CJ Group, known for its diverse food products, ingredients, bioscience segment. Auroni has over 2 decades of global experience in FMCG and business-to-business specialty ingredients, holding leadership roles at CJ, but also previously at PepsiCo, at International Flavor and Fragrances, and his expertise spans everything from strategy, portfolio management, business development, as well as leading various front-end R&D and commercialization. As VP of R&D there, he leads their global open innovation initiatives, driving ultimately scalable, cost-effective technologies across their CPG and food ingredient portfolio, and oversees a really interesting innovation network, not just the US, but Europe, Korea, Japan. Previously at IFF, he was the VP of Strategy and Business Development, ultimately helping shepherd the post-merger environment that occurred after the merger with DuPont Nutrition Biosciences. And at Pepsi, he led various efforts related to everything from ingredient discovery, agricultural innovation, as well as product commercialization, including R&D for the Starbucks Pepsi ready-to-drink category. His undergraduate degree, as well as master's from the Stevens Institute of Technology, biomedical engineering, and master's in innovation portfolio management, and a lot to get into today. I'm really excited to have him. Auroni Majumdar, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ira. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to a lot of this discussion, just because you've done so much in such a short period of time. But I mean, I would love to, as we typically do, Auroni, hand things off to you just for a little bit to further talk a little bit about your background, sort of prior to all this, just what got you interested in biomedical engineering, and obviously so the whole area of innovation. But I noticed that very early on in your dossier there, you worked in the pharmaceutical industry, quality, packaging, innovation, analytical chemistry. Interesting abuse deterrent opioid research as well. Take us back a bit and talk about sort of life before FMCG.
Sure. Where to start? So like most college undergrads, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I entered undergrad in 01. Comp sci, computers, right post.com era was hot, right? It was kind of like the no-brainer territory. I'm Indian by ethnicity, so by way of parents, it's that engineer, doctor, lawyer route, and then this computer space was like interesting to them, so they're like, okay, if you're interested in that. So I actually started as a comp sci major. I was one of those kids, like age 13, building computers a whole bit, but it was actually more of a hardware guy. Didn't really realize the difference at the time, like strangely enough. Went the route of biomedical engineering just because it was hot at the time. It was developing into its own program. It was like a combination of chemical engineering, mechanical bio. I had some pharmaceutical experiences in my background, some internships, and I also had this really loose aspiration. Maybe I did want to go the doctor route. So finished my undergrad with biomedical engineering, really what I liked about it was this exposure to like a diverse set of sciences and really like pulling and flexing my technical muscle, to the extent that you can at that age.
Mhm.
Um, I entered the pharmaceutical industry doing analytical chemistry for a generic pharmaceutical company. We were developing abuse-free opioid. So basically, it was generic, right? So you were matching the dissolution curves of branded opioids, but then trying to put non-actives if you were to ingest it the right way. But if you were to abuse it, became active deterrents, which would actually make you sick. So just trying to do a combination of things here. And my job was really to measure the actual dissolution and assist on the formulation element of it. Super interesting technically, but like in practice, not what I wanted to do with my career. Be in the lab, at that specific level at that point in time. So I was open to kind of exploring other areas. Went back to school while working to get my master's in innovation management, portfolio management. This was right around 2008. Economy was doing really bad. It was the housing crisis. I ended up taking 3 months, 2.5 months off, backpacking Europe, just taking some time off after grad school. And then when I came back, I found this opportunity at PepsiCo, technical project management. Was really just kind of blown away at the level of research that a food and beverage company was doing or could be doing. And it was actually just a drop in the bucket to what they were investing in for the next decade after. They pulled back since for a variety of different reasons, but they had this position and they were doing biology receptor research, new ingredient discovery. You mentioned earlier, first 5 years of my career there, first 3 years, ingredient discovery, so new sweetener research, natural preservatives, natural colors, delivery system technology, a lot of technology development, a lot of university partnerships, supplier partnerships, contracted research, so on and so forth. Uh,
Mhm.
and then yeah, I just was always curious. I was always curious about how the technical and the science met the business, and how it drove the business in from a differentiation standpoint, either at the product level, at the top line, at the bottom line level, so on and so forth. Um, So actually, so sorry, even before jumping to that, there was this really cool experience in that first 5 years where I did 2 years where I stood up an ag science function. This was super
Yeah.
fascinating. Didn't have really an ag background, but I partnered with an ex-Syngenta VP and we stood up a new function to help support our procurement efforts for agriculture-derived raw materials, which, for most CPGs, based on a standard spec of processability to your finished good. But rarely, or not in many instances, do you use ag science to then further develop that raw material for other qualities, including productivity, right, to help reduce
Yeah.
your cost basis. So we were investigating various strategies for consumer relevant traits, for manufacturability, things tied to sensory and so on and so forth. Um, Let me just take a quick pause because I think that covered like like the early part of my career. If you had any,
Yeah, no, it's it's perfect because I wanted thinking about the Pepsi era, because as you're mentioning, you're involved in a diversity of really cool stuff, from the ag science function, the ingredients, the Starbucks relationship. Could you talk, because we profiled a lot of your former colleagues on the show here, and again, I've being a pharma guy, I've always been amazed by, wow, it's not just a few blockbusters. I mean, when you're dealing with some of these, we don't think about it, that here's a product that a billion people use a day. You got to think about scale, right? You got to think about sort of the complex systems that come into place, whether it's potatoes or tomatoes or whatever the case may be. And this is the interesting learnings, because we talk a lot about innovation on the show. Scalable innovation is really what everybody wants, and being thrown into a machine like that, hey, we're doing this cool agricultural stuff, we got to make sure we could supply a billion people a day. that's a different thing. And I'd love to any interesting learnings from that period because I think this is really important, especially the type of company you're in now. It's kind of big, and so you got to
Yeah.
translate that.
No, it's a great question, and there's a lot of ways I'm thinking about it right now. So I think the first is maybe to go into the next part of my Pepsi journey, right? So I did the ag science bit, actually working with a mentor at that time, the partner that I mentioned, ex Syngenta. We started to learn about that was actually my foray into the value chain and understanding profitability within different pillars of the value chain and starting to understand it really works backward from your MSRP, what the end consumer is willing to pay, and then all the value in between. So my naive self for the first 5 years was like, oh, we're doing all these consumer relevant technologies, and it's going to have consumer value, and with that we're going to have more penetration, more volume, right? Not understanding that there's bottlenecks in the system from one, a purchasing standpoint and consumer price point, but also like shelf space, truck space, so on and so forth. And then this idea that, oh, we can also go more premium because of all this extra value add, but then going more premium at the sacrifice of volume and your core demographics. So start to put all these pieces together. So go like the comparison point to pharma, it's really interesting. So I think first starting with pharma has the luxury of not having the same shallow price points as fast moving food and beverage products. You're paying for treatment in a lot of situations, and you're paying for, depending on your particular ailment, almost like survival, right? So at this point, you're willing to spend more, again, depending on the severity of the ailment, or less. But there's no cap on it, right? And it's also subsidized by insurance, if you have insurance to subsidize it. So that allows the pharma system to make a lot more money. And if you're making a lot more money at the end consumer level, then you're also able to afford a lot more innovation. And you're able to use your balance sheet to invest into a lot more technology and a lot more innovation that you can then implement and then actually generate revenue on. In the food and beverage world, you have healthy balance sheet at these companies, and the percentage of R&D investment, percentage of revenue for R&D investment is often high, but your actual ability to implement innovation is limited because of your COGS threshold and your MSRP. So that's actually like a real stark contrast there. One more thing that pops into my head that's really interesting, and it actually ties to my IFF experience as well, which I'd love to weave in. When it comes to food and beverage products, particularly food and beverage too, because you have a lot of different processing platforms, it's less there's less flexibility in your operational infrastructure than what you see in pharma. So if you had like a centralized, it doesn't actually have to be centralized by way of organizational structure, but if you had units that were doing the R&D and developing your drug candidate, as you progress through the approval process, if one looks better by way of TAM, consumer demand, profitability, regulatory approval, you can pivot these resources and quickly move them to what's in your pipeline, like what's hot in your pipeline. And then your operational infrastructure, there's differences in processing for sure, but it's more flexible than, let's say, doing orange juice and potatoes. Like, there's very little, like, can I turn my, at the time when I was there, we had PepsiCo, the Tropicana business, but you can't take your Tropicana assets and start making Lay's potato chips, right? The equipment configurations, the fryers, even bringing in the raw materials, peeling and all that, so on and so forth, it's drastically different. Storage is drastically different. But in pharma, it's way more mutable. So those are some differences. And it's interesting because, you mentioned my IFF experience. I didn't get to that in my description of my journey, but at the IFF experience, we did a lot of M&A, and at the end of that M&A, we had created this company that was within specialty chemicals, specialty ingredients, and we had a lot of pharma leadership. And my simplified narrative is, what, like, the pharma industry, the TAM, the size of these companies, the revenue, the growth, like, what better leadership, what better CEO than getting someone from pharma to this more niche specialty ingredients? And actually, I firmly believe that's not the best decision because of some of the things that I mentioned on the PepsiCo example, right? When you have a lot of ingredients, if you have flavors and proteins and texturants, each one of these have different R&D capabilities, different assets, and that flexibility and that, looking at financial statements and trying to move dollars on a page from investment to what you think will drive future growth, you can't do that because you have very specialized skill sets, you have very specialized equipment. And the realization at the time, and then definitely after, was what was created in that environment was much more akin to like a 3M, like a BASF, than your standard like pharmaceutical company that makes drug bioactives.
It's funny. You just jogged a memory here because again, I visited IFF when it was originally IFF, like I don't know, said it'd be like 25 years ago now. And I just remember the only thing that stands out in my mind from that experience was like these really extremely expert folks that were good at, like, I was in a plant biotech company at the time, and they were really great at taking like this extract of whatever, the rose, and they're like, wow, this this smells like, a grilled cheese sandwich on sourdough bread with a slice of tomato and a smoked oak porter. I'm like, smells like a rose to me, but they really, there's a sort of like an underappreciated, that whole fragrance and flavoring specialist. But it's the one thing that popped into my mind. And I know you were involved in all the M&A and bringing these companies together, but yeah, that was
Yeah, and when you
nevertheless.
so I mean a few things, right? So it's art that meets science, right? When it
Yeah,
comes to flavors and fragrances, and you train yourself like a sommelier, like an artist, to understand the palette of ingredients and the synergistic experience you can create by using different components of that palette at different concentrations in applications and how they perform in applications. And so much of that has a human experience to it, right? And oftentimes I'm like, oh, well, how's AI and how does automation like, impact the industry? And to me, we can get into that later, but it's an
sure.
accelerator because, maybe down the line, Neuralink and, advanced eNOS type
Yeah,
capabilities and GCO, GCMS, flavor mapping and fragrance mapping, it'll get to a point. We always need a human, right? Because the human's
right,
the one that's consuming it at the end of the day
right.
to verify it. Um, but what you jogged was flavors and fragrances. Why do they sit with each other? Because even though flavors are going into food and beverage, and fragrances are going, anywhere from personal care, home care, laundry care type products, you still have this olfactive um, skill that you have to develop over time that's
Yeah,
basically done through apprenticeship, right?
yeah,
Over years. And you're training these muscles and you're getting better at distinguishing and picking it apart, and how you describe it, right? Like these fine nuances and, what's there, what's not there, like descriptive analysis, but also the intensity of what's there, what's not there. So there's a very similar talent development process for both those businesses, I think is one point. Usually probably the last one that I would mention when describing the similarities. From a R&D standpoint, you have a lot of the same um, discovery methods from new
hmm,
fragrance ingredients and flavor ingredients, and a lot of the same extraction methods like steam
yeah,
distillations, solvent extractions, and CO2, like just trying to get the essence of what you've identified in its agricultural source. What I previously alluded to is really that compounding the flavors or the perfumer element, taking those individual molecules and components or essential oils, what the different ingredients and creating that experience. There's a lot of commonality there. There's a lot of commonality in your raw material sourcing as a way of using there's a significant overlap of the ingredients you use for fragrances and flavors. So providing an economies of scale benefit of procuring both together, even though they're going in two different value chains or industrial end segments. And then from an operational standpoint, albeit you're not really using the same equipment for regulatory reasons and quality reasons, it's a lot of the same equipment from a compounding standpoint, from drying technology, and so on and so forth. So to me, that is the closest example to what we were talking about with pharma than what was created by bringing more food ingredients and commodity ingredients into this ecosystem that was once F&F at IFF.
Absolutely. Right. Well, let's transition over to CJ, because clearly in this current role, I mean, you have a very broad responsibility, from ingredients to process technologies, packaging, agriculture. I mean, there's an extensive list here. Arnie, I'd love just to start off, for those that are unfamiliar with the company, and the company's not a small shop. I mean, it's a pretty big conglomerate in Korea. Introduce us to CJ. Introduce us to sort of your area within, and we'll talk about innovation in a bit, but your sort of division you're in. And then also, if you could say a few words for our audience about K culture, because I know I understood another interview that you gave, or I forget, I was reading about you somewhere, and it talked about sort of that you developed this passion for K. Me too. I mean, we were discussing before the show. I love
everyone,
K-pop.
right?
Yeah, I love my kimchi, but I mean, it's much more than that. Um, Introduce K culture and a little bit of how it's sort of brewed in what CJ is all about.
Yeah, sure. So it's like a perfect storm, right? Where to start? I think if I talk about, let's talk about CJ first. So you had mentioned CJ it's a group from like a classic like Asian conglomerate that you would see in APAC and many parts of the world. So lots of different businesses, businesses that have connective tissue through them, and in certain situations, businesses that don't. So there's some core divisions within CJ Group. We have an entertainment and media division, which is very unrelated to what I do, even though there are some cooperative initiatives together as part of activating K culture, actually. The entertainment and media division, it covers production and distribution of like movies and TVs. So if you're familiar with like Severance and Squid Games and Parasite, those are some of some of the outputs from this division. It also manages movie theaters. For the folks that are not familiar, CGV is like the AMC of Korea and many other countries in that region. Lots of state-of-the-art technology that's implemented there, from like 40X and ScreenX and various things. It was actually the first time, a great experience. And they have Tempur-Pedic bed movie viewing experience. So you actually just lay down on a bed at whatever setting you want, and then you have little nightstands and tables to have your beverage, your food, and you're just what a wonderful, relaxing experience to watch a movie. So yeah,
for sleep in 5 minutes. Sorry, I lie down, I'm out. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah. For some, it might not be the right experience. There's a logistics business, various capabilities around the world, from ground, sea, air, logistics and distribution, refrigerated, frozen, ambient, so on and so forth. There's retail businesses, from bakeries to beauty care, Olive Young, if folks aren't familiar. It's like the Sephora of Korea, and there's some collaborations actually with Sephora in the US, flagship store that we're going to be opening up out in the West Coast in California. in any day now. There's restaurant operations, there's food service operations, there's internet companies and Olive Network, so on and so forth. And yeah, just fast forwarding a bit, the division that I'm a part of is called CJ CheilJedang, and that division has three core components. There's a animal nutrition feed care business, there's a bio business, and then there's the food business. I myself am part of the food business. The food business is roughly around 10 billion annual turnover on a global basis, for what is more or less in the 30 to 33 billion range at the group level. Our foods division comprises both B2C and B2B consumer packaged goods, so finished goods, as well as ingredients. And my team, I lead global open innovation, which is all around scouting, evaluation, and implementation of external technologies across what you described were the 6 innovation domains that my team operates in. So ingredient technology, process technology, package technology, ag and aquaculture, fermentation technology, and digital solutions. So we scour the globe, and we look for technologies across those domains, prioritized by imminent and midterm business needs, across both our global and regional businesses that we develop, nurture, incubate, and implement in collaboration with our R&D partners and business partners globally.
And continuing along those lines, because clearly, everything that you've been involved in, you've been involved in everything, function, flavor, organoleptics, everything in between. Can you sort of talk a little bit about what the open innovation, typical process is all about, and sort of some of the future of food innovation categories that you're looking at? Is it about flavor? Is it about function? Is it about artificial intelligence, companion stuff that goes along with it? What type of stuff are you evaluating? What stuff is excited about? What type of folks do you throw out of your office? Take us a little into sort of the future of food innovation as you sit there today.
Yeah, sure. So a big part of what I developed when I joined CJ was 2 things. One, a hub and spoke model. So my team's organized across 4 regions. I myself am based out of our US Innovation Hub, which is in the New York, New Jersey area. We have a team in Europe on Wageningen University campus, a team attached to our R&D headquarters in Korea, and a team in Japan. Each of those teams, they're tasked with scouting technologies in their specific region and surrounding regions across those innovation domains. Where we have critical mass in that specific region by way of R&D capability or sizable business, then the regional head there also has the task of aligning the regional open innovation strategy. So they're going to be working with the local teams to understand, to identify, prioritize, and understand the needs for both the short term and the midterm. They're tasked with taking technology that we find on a global basis and to cross-fertilize it from another region that we might have found a technology into their region dependent on that specific need. And managing the project execution, which would be the evaluation, the development, the scale up, and then the commercialization of that technology within that specific region. In terms of what we look at and how we balance our portfolio, so we have a portfolio management practice built into the actual capability. We try to balance between what we call market pull or business pull and technology push initiatives, and try to strike roughly around a 70-30 split. So 70% of what the team is looking for is being directly pulled by the business and needed within either as soon as a 6-month to 1-year horizon or within a 2-year horizon. So it's tied to our technology and product roadmaps. 30% of it is more things that we see in the space that we think have differentiating value for our businesses, for our products, for our capabilities, that we then push into the organization and we look to align and create sponsorship. So that could be at a regional level, at a functional level, at a group level, or a business level. And if we're able to create that sponsorship, then that becomes a part of our portfolio, and then we would jointly evaluate with the respective team that's now pulling for it. I think diving deeper into the innovation domains, or really the subdomains, starts to give a sense of what we're looking for. So the two most comprehensive are ingredients and processing. So ingredients has multiple subdomains. I think you even mentioned, so like flavor technology being one, sweeteners, texture solutions, natural preservation, colors, proteins. As being in this industry, or with strong familiarity of the various elements of the industry, each one of those subdomains operates very differently in an application. So we have different experts from the team that are assigned to each of those subdomains that act as global portfolio managers, where they're tasked with understanding all the technologies on a global basis in that specific portfolio. And also working with the regional leaders and the various cross-functional engagement leaders to start to cross-fertilize what they have in their portfolio to different opportunities. So it creates the hub and spoke model we developed was designed to enable this cross-fertilization from category to category, application to application, category to category, region to region, so on and so forth, based on this the R&R, the roles and responsibilities I'm describing.
That's a really interesting thing because, again, back in the day, sorry, I'm aging myself here, but pharma companies were here, food companies were here, and they sort of did their own thing. And nowadays we have, a lot of cross-fertilization with obviously pharma companies creating things that don't necessarily look like drugs in terms of some of the microbiome stuff that they're involved in. Food companies, a lot of functional food and very interesting nutritional type innovations that go beyond just, hey, no salt and lowering sugar and all that bit. I just love to get your perspective, because I know, again, you look at many different, countries, and what is functional food here. I think in Japan it's called funkashinaru. I don't know what it's called in Korea, but there's sort of these different, obviously food as medicine, and that whole trend has gotten hot in the United States recently. It's been much more hot in Asia the last several decades. But anything exciting going on? I'd just love to see how you view that stuff, because clearly it's a different value proposition, and how you ultimately create these different countries, very different regulatory systems and so forth. But love you to just take us down that path a little bit on how you think about this particular segment.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a very, very exciting segment. And it's new and it's hot and it's moving super fast, right? Yeah, I've been in the industry now for 21 years, and my first decade plus was, better for you was a big focus. We started to get into, what the PepsiCo portfolio could do in the good for you space. So the idea that it's like, okay, well, sugar, salt, fat, consumers want this experience, but they don't want as much of that. So try to deliver the experience while reducing it. And I think that was like the core focus for a lot of food and beverage companies. And the consumer just being like, food is, or maybe consumer packaged good, it's in general this class of like filler, fun for you experiences, right? And I'm not necessarily tying it to like nutrition, but now it's different. Now I think a few things. I think coming out of COVID, health and wellness got extremely accelerated. It was obviously always there, but everyone started to pay attention to like, well, I got to be healthier. Like, immunity, as an example, is core focus. So like immunity, cognition, sleep, a lot of these things kind of came out of that, and there was a lot more attention. Okay, well, how can I how can I augment this, and how can I create, the best version of myself? And I think that translated into this, well, food should be able to support these benefit spaces that, I'm looking to now enhance. So what are the foods that can do it? What are the ingredients that can do it inside the foods? And it all started to merge. And now we're at a spot where people want more for their foods, and, call it what you want, functional foods. There's a limited amount that an individual, I call it the share of stomach, right? There's a global share of stomach, there's a regional share of stomach, there's a household share of stomach, and then an individual share of stomach. And that bottleneck by shelf space and shelf life is really the equation that you're trying to fit into. So the shelves, the share of stomach, and what now people, they want to optimize, right? They want food that's not just better for you, that does something more, but also tastes good. So gives me protein, gives me nutritional value, supports some of these other health benefits that I described, immunity as an example. So you're starting to see not the convergence, the attention into this specific space. Food as medicine, I think, super interesting, and actually very closely tied to pharma. And there's a group and a VC that I'm closely tied to, that has this large thesis around that they're actually one and the same, right? But they're being treated as separate. So you're eating food, and the food of the past is creating certain ailments, and then those ailments are being passed down to another industry to then be treated by pharmaceuticals. So if you look at it holistically, and if you look at the overall spend from a consumer standpoint, from a company standpoint, and revenue generation, are you able to pivot certain pillars where, rather than treat it at the end, can you treat it up front, gain the value up front? So, in the process, you have to convince the consumer that, over your life, you might be spending X amount. You're just not waiting for yourself to have the problem to spend it. You're trying to get ahead of it, on the food side. So you might be spending more for what is now nutritious, more nutrient density. But in the long run, it's better for you, right? It's giving you longevity. And you're actually, likelihood is you're probably getting a cost savings, because this food spend is probably, in aggregate, going to be cheaper than what you might on a hospital bill or a medical bill.
All right, take us out a little bit. Over the horizon. I mean, you clearly, I no doubt you see a lot of business plans come your way, and folks pitching you. What are the technologies that you ultimately believe are going to sort of reshape food over the next decade? What are you excited about? What would you like to eliminate? And then if you could also, I mean, and if it's not confidential, if it is, we can think about it. I know that you advise, per your venture initiative, several small companies. I saw one on here, and sort of some really exotic peanut butters and some water soluble cannabinoids and sort of everything in between. A lot of, again, love to just again hear about some of your advisory activities as well. I'm sure the audience would like to hear about sort of the next gen of small startups. What should they be planning for in terms of, should we be setting up a company for a new type of protein, or what types of interesting things out there that you think are sort of venture worthy, let's say, as we get into over the horizon?
So what I like about the startup ecosystem in recent years, versus years in the past, is I think they learned a lot from corporate feedback, scalability, regulatory. I think there was this point where became so altruistic that things like sustainability was the reason for their success. And the reality is it's just one pillar of a lot of criteria that create successful commercializable technology and products. And it's actually a way that our team evaluates new technologies, right? So technology performance, I always describe it as that's the entryway into the conversation. It needs to do something that I can't do with my incumbent. The gatekeepers, though, are operational and commercial feasibility. Is the supply chain health to practice the technology there? I don't want to be tasked with having to figure out a supply chain in order to just use the technology. I need the company that's providing it to kind of figure that out. From a operational fit, understanding potential CapEx or implementation impact, right? Is it going to be a high CapEx investment for me? If it is, that's prohibitive, right? I need to allocate it from my balance sheet, and I may not be able to do that depending on my overall, enterprise strategy and how I want to use available funds. But understanding that upfront is a key criteria to determine what we actually go after, right? If it's compatible with our assets, and the unit economic impact. Is implementing this going to negatively impact my margins? Is it going to help my margins, right? For me, the best technology is something that does something that I couldn't do before, that's consumer relevant, that is also margin accretive. So it's a productivity benefit. Like, bring me something like that and I'll have a much easier conversation internally. So all those elements, like maybe not articulated the exact same way, a lot of the founders that I meet with are assessing they're building their strategy and assessing their technology against all those metrics. And they're also doing it against clearly identified benchmarks. So understanding what they're competing with, because more often than not, they're trying to replace something or augment something based on either a company, corporate, or a consumer need. So really understanding from a performance standpoint, from an operational standpoint, from a commercial standpoint, what they need to achieve in order to replace that technology of the past. So that conversation has gotten a lot smarter, which is really encouraging. I think the humbling of the capital markets has been a really positive effect to the ecosystem. Several years ago, they were so healthy, and a lot of VC money and corporate money into the system where, if largely speaking, not the only incentivation, but deploying capital so it's not quote unquote sitting around, is part of the success criteria when it comes to venture capital. Mm-hmm. And when you have so much money and you kind of have to deploy it to anyone that's looking for it that fits a larger thesis. Now that there's less money, there's higher quality startups, lesser startups, but higher quality startups you can now more strategically implement. I also think the criteria or KPI around fast deployment has also changed, where capital calls are more structured throughout the year when a deal actually presents itself versus pulling the money too early and then being forced to deploy it fast and maybe not as responsibly as one could. So I think the system itself has gotten better through all the different feedback loops. The money's also gotten smarter. I think I've been focused on startup and entrepreneurs, but also the investors in the space now understand what makes a successful startup, right? Not just the broader, higher level theme or ambition that they're going after, but more specifics on how and who they're working with. The business development piece, I think, is significantly smarter. Previously, just having, CRO or research projects with large tiers, like that would be this, and it's still a massive indicator of heading in the right direction, but balancing that with, let's say smaller players, but quicker off takes and, just your business development pipeline and then the thought going into that from an entrepreneur and from an advisory standpoint has become a lot smarter. And you mentioned like my own advice, those are a lot of the things that I'm sharing are the things that I share to the startups that I advise for. It's really like identify your benchmarks quick and early. You need to always measure up with you need to identify your benchmarks, and as you go through your R&D and your product development process, you need to consistently measure against it, right, on all different fronts, because that's what your customer is going to be doing, and getting ahead of it is part of the value proposition. Other things, it's anchor yourself to large TAM, large consumer needs, growing needs. Understand your competitive landscape, not just from existing commercial benchmarks, but also in development, who's developing what and how do you compare to them. Also consider, partnership opportunity within the segment. I think what you're seeing is a little more than I think I have in previous years is consolidation at the startup level, which typically doesn't happen because it's so early stage. But a lot of companies that are either partnering with each other or acquiring each other, realizing that even at that stage, there's SG&A optimization opportunities and ways to cross fertilize IP or capabilities holistically, and then increase the probability of success of what is now the new co, again, even at a startup phase. So that's really interesting to see. What else? Just like, yeah, just thinking through like when I think about startup activity and that comes from like a very unique tech platform, like understanding, what the tech platform can do, not just within food and beverage per se, but across all value chains. Like we talked about this with the farm example, um, understanding the the full value within the value chain, backing in from the MSRP, right? Are you in a fast moving category that has shallow price points, or do you have the room of, let's say, pharma, where there's, it's value based pricing with very, very high ceilings? Where does it make sense to operate, right? Tying that to a competitive landscape of SWOT analysis, Porter five force analysis, and just starting to figure out where your tech platform can operate on a really holistic basis, and then to kind of narrow down on specific use cases, POCs that you can execute, get industry feedback, advisory feedback. I think myself included, just reaching out through LinkedIn or other channels and just having exploratory conversations and getting little bits of information to help build out your thesis before you start to raise capital and deploy capital in big ways. Again, I think the system itself is doing that just through years of learning, but that's always guidance that I provide. And then, yeah, I think the other key is the business development. Big companies are great because they represent significant penetration, a volumetric appeal, so on and so forth, but they move really slow. And trying to understand why they move slow is really important. It's because they need to execute big. They need to have large launches that represent material growth for their large base. And that takes time, and you might not have the time. So balancing, large company business development with smaller executions, with quicker ones that may not be the size of the project you're looking for, but can help start to fuel and provide investment to do some of the activities that you're doing. Plus, they act as proof points, and you learn from those executions. And when it comes to getting fresh, dry powder from the capital markets, having those commercial wins is also a good sign that you're heading in the right direction while you wait for a bigger win. So those are some of the things that I like encourage, some of the startups that I advise for to think about. Also, we didn't touch upon this, but like the exit, if you're looking for an acquisition, depending on what you're making, like a CPG, mentioned peanut butter, like some of the guidance was, well, there's a lot of historical data on peanut butter companies that are acquired, and there's only a handful of companies that would acquire a peanut butter company based on their existing portfolio mix, their existing capabilities to take it to market, and understanding the space. So start to understand at what point, at what value do these companies start to acquire companies such as yours, and then to actually create a business plan that's staged to get from point A to point B, where you are showing steady growth on that journey to become this attractive target for said acquirer, and build your marketing plan, your capacity plan, your sales plan, the synergy amongst those three functions, and your R&D plan, right? Because you're going to need to put steady innovation and new SKU development along that journey. Stage it in such a way that it ladders up to that exit in mind. Because one of the quote unquote worst things that could happen is that you get to a certain amount of growth because you did all these things to get to that growth, but then all of a sudden you flatlined or you're starting to contract. On paper, that doesn't look like a good acquisition target because something happened here. But it may not be about the product. It may not be about the overarching thesis that would actually make you attractive for a company that's looking to acquire. You might have just not staged your execution in such a way where they show this dip. And now you have to explain to investors, to potential, corporate developer, M&A groups on why this dip occurred and what you're going to do to change it. And what I'm describing isn't easy, and it's not like you can do it up front. It's kind of like a constant conversation amongst your C-suite over time, at various stages over time, to understand where you are and what you need to do to constantly show, like, hey, I'm growing 30% each and every year. It's not slowing down, and I'm doing things in the right sequence in order to do that. So that's like it's like a dance, right? And it's complicated. It's not something you can just prescribe and set in stone and just execute on. It's like constantly reading a variety of different inputs, customer signals, consumer signals, developing a partner ecosystem, co-manufacturing if you're going that route, supplier partnerships to help, help accelerate or put you on that path, on that journey.
Yeah, yeah. And I couldn't, help but notice. I was, I was looking to see, where you're going to be and the types of sort of public-facing stuff that's going to be happening in the coming months. And one of the interesting ones that popped up was it's next month at Future Food Tech in San Francisco. You're going to be doing this reverse Shark Tank with folks from Mondelez and Givaudan, and actually the person hosting that group, Nora Caldi, I had on the show from the peptide company Noritas. But I thought this was quite interesting in the sense that it's going to be a reverse Shark Tank, where you're basically going to be, telling all the young innovators that show up, what you're looking for and where you're seeking fresh innovation. So that's a very sort of interesting, reverse, elegant approach. And I was just interested in say a couple words about that, but also where else are you going to be, or any other sort of public forums along these lines coming up for the first half of 2026 that we could potentially also run into you, meet you, listen to you talk. Anything else on the calendar along these lines, please?
So the next big one will be Future Food Tech, and I'm really excited for it. Over the years, like, that conference in of itself has really propelled itself to be one of the bigger ones in the US, and they have global events too. And very appreciative of the opportunity to be able to speak at it. The session, it's really interesting, and when I was talking to the conference producers, and they were mentioning, hey, we're thinking about this style segment, this forum where we have corporates talk to the ecosystem. I was like, hey, I love it, right? Because I'm of the mind where I want all my technology needs to just be out there. I want people to be calling me and emailing me nonstop, asking me to evaluate their technology as it fits my needs. I joke and I say, like, if it's up to me, like, they'd be, on pamphlets, I'd be flying a plane over all major cities and just dropping them down and say, hey, if anyone's got something for me to look at, reach out to me or reach out to my team. So that's not practical, but this is, very close to it, right? So it's not just the young innovators. There's going to be large tier multinational suppliers that I want them to hear as well. Like, to me, one thing I didn't mention is my team spends, I'm going to say equal, but it's not black and white or cut and dry equal, but we spend just as much time with mature suppliers and working with them on, pipeline activity, pipeline projects, co-development, or just working with their commercial catalog and implementing it in innovative ways, as well as the startup ecosystem. So they'll be present, having an opportunity to share my needs with them, and also getting that engagement thereafter is I think will be really helpful as part of our overall objectives for the year. The startup ecosystem, of course, innovators that are working on tech platforms that can be oriented towards some of the needs that I'm going to be talking about, or have solutions in their pipeline or commercial solutions, but they never thought about CJ Foods as a potential customer. Getting that engagement, but also investors, right? For investors to understand the areas that not just CJ is looking at, but the other companies, Mondelez, Givaudan, and these are the things that we're looking at, that we're interested in. when you start to build your next theses, your next funds, or deploy capital with existing funds, maybe take a look at this. Or if you have it in your portfolio company already because you've invested in it, or in your deal flow, come knock on my door. I'd love to have a conversation with that company. I'd love to share, within the bounds of confidentiality, any insights my team uncovers on that company that could help inform your decision. So I look at it as an opportunity to speak to the ecosystem as a whole and just get more engagement coming out of it. So I'm extremely excited for it. And the format itself is super unique. It's not one that I've come across in other events. So yeah, really excited, for quote unquote being a guinea pig in it.
It sounds like it's going to be fun and be interesting what new innovations pop up. But it's an exciting journey you've been on here, Ronnie. I'm it's fun sort of walking down memory lane with you here and thinking about what's coming over the horizon. Any final messages while we have you, whether it's on innovation, on sort of the next generation of food scientists, anything that I missed, please.
Um, no, I think you asked like other speaking events. There's still some that I'm working through and some podcast sessions and um, so just like if folks that hear it, follow me on LinkedIn. I'll be posting about it. Um, there's going to be a future foods workshop at UMass that I'm really excited about in June. UMass being a major food science program and then hosting their inaugural event um, this year. So excited to participate on a high impact panel, high caliber rather panel for that discussion. Um, but yeah, I think just following me, following CJ Foods and looking at some of the things that we're doing, investing in some of the partnerships, you get a sense of some of the things we're focused on. When it comes to the future of food, I think it's got to be the most exciting point that I've ever seen it. There's just so much activity, so much investment, so much entrepreneurship, technology, enablers, and picks and shovels, and lots of things that are all available to help accelerate it. And that's in the food tech space, even the CPG space. It's really excited to see the entrepreneurial activity there. A lot of the moats that previously existed are no longer there, or are now available to all entrepreneurs, from marketing capabilities, distribution capabilities, production capabilities. So I like it because it speeds up innovation. It accelerates the speed of innovation, and it keeps the large corporates on their toes. There's just a lot of benefit from faster cycles that come from it. It makes a challenging business environment, but I think businesses will adapt because the cycles, will create a new baseline, and we're going to have to adapt. But it's just a really exciting time for food and food innovation as a whole. So, things like AI, we're still just scratching the surface on. Like we didn't get a chance to talk about that. Excited to see how that's going to further accelerate things. Robotics as well. Yeah, I think I said that this is the most exciting time. I would say I know that comment is going to be really old in like 2 to 3 years when all these other new technologies start to get a little bit more mature. It's not going to take that much more time. So, biotech is one that we didn't really touch upon. That's, been front and center for the last few years, but I think everything's brewing and everything's going to be coming together in a really big way over the next 10 years.
And I'm excited for you. I think it's such an exciting space, and I look forward to continue to follow you, the company, all the interesting innovation that you uh, continue to push forward and integrate into your own offerings. But really, really great stuff. Again, for everybody out there that is going to be listening to this episode across the podcast networks or who will be watching on the YouTube channel. You've been spending time with Auroni Majumdar, Vice President R&D Global Open Innovation, CJ CheilJedang. Auroni, I want to thank you for taking the time to walk us through your story, walk us through this really exciting era of these, as you say, these differentiated consumer solutions. Thanks for everything you do on sort of to move science and technology forward. And I'd like to say here on our show, thanks for helping to create a better, more flavorful and a healthier tomorrow view, the things you work on. Really a great story, and I look forward to continue to follow it all.
Great. Thanks a lot, Ira. This was great. A lot of fun. Appreciate you inviting me onto your show.
Really great having you.